Over 250 years ago, the United States of America was formed. But also, over 160 years ago, African Americans saw freedom. It's Juneteenth and VA 250. And it's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric Claville, and you're joining us for our recognition of Juneteenth celebration and the birth of America. Once again, I want to thank you for joining us, as you always do, as we broadcast from the campus of the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation, from none other than WNSB Hot 91, the soul of VA. Look, we hope that you are enjoying your summer break and your weekend, and we hope you enjoyed the weekend, because it's a very special weekend that we have. It is our Juneteenth celebration and our VA 250 celebration. Well, listen, we're going to get into what Juneteenth is and VA 250, but we are elated to have, only for a few moments on the show, the special advisor for VA 250 and the first African-American female superintendent of Fort Monroe, none other than Chief Eola Dance. Eola, how are you this Sunday?
Wow. Well, it's always good to join you, and I'm feeling inspired right now.
Well, listen, as our listeners don't know, you and I have known each other for a quarter of a century now, over 25 years.
Yeah.
And, we're classmates from undergrad at the great, illustrious Southern University and A&M College. That is where we both graduated undergrad. And we've gone from there to do great things. And you have truly, truly done phenomenal things in your career in public service. And I want you to tell us a little bit about that before we get started with your role now as special advisor for VA 250. So tell our audience a little bit about your background and really that you're a native from this area. So you really came home.
That's right. I grew up in Hampton, Virginia. I always had a love for history and culture, but I didn't know that would be what I would study. I was introduced to the National Park Service at Southern University, go Jags, and it turned into a career. So I'm so thankful for the first African-American director of the Park Service, Mr. Bob Stanton, as well as the mentors over the years who actually helped me to, form a career from park ranger to superintendent. So I started out giving tours of historic sites and cultural landscapes, and finished my career as what we call a resource manager. So planning for parks and helping to shape parks.
Awesome. And now you're back and you are serving in a capacity. You were at Monticello for a while as well as a director there, but you're back here serving as special advisor for VA 250. Tell us a little bit about what VA 250 is and also your role there.
Well, with VA 250, I am senior advisor to the African American Advisory Council, and I serve as a liaison between our distinguished council, the commission itself, and the community. And so for me, it's the perfect space because I enjoy engagement, especially helping to tell hidden stories and helping people to tell their own stories. So most of my work is out with the community and connecting them with one another and making sure their stories are amplified, and their events like the Juneteenth programming that took place this weekend.
Absolutely. And for those that, just to give you the official designation, what VA 250 is, it's an official organization and multi-year initiative commemorating the 250th anniversary, or the semi-quincentennial, I got it right in the first time, right?
That's right. Practice that.
Of the American Revolution and the U.S. independence in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now, this was established by the General Assembly, and it highlights Virginia's pivotal role in the nation's founding under the rallying cry, America Made in Virginia. And that's from the VA 250 website. Eola, when this is about America, right? The American Revolution and the independence from Great Britain, right? We know that America started as colonies and then, of course, broke free from their mother. We call Mother England, Great Britain. But there's another side to that, because we're also commemorating Juneteenth, where in 1865, it was the end of the Civil War, which was fought really to hold, some states wanted to hold blacks as slaves, and the other states, meaning the North, wanted to free them. With you serving the capacity that you are, VA250 Special Advisor, VA250, more specifically the African American story, tell us a little bit about it in your time that you have left. How are you balancing that? How are you telling that story and the weight of that story? You and I, we talk a lot, and there's a major weight, to be able to balance everything and tell these stories.
Yes, with VA250, we've been in an incredible position to help people to connect that narrative from African landing in 1619 to Juneteenth in understanding the African American journey to freedom. So those ideals of liberty, justice, equality, and inalienable rights that are foundational to the American Revolution were not fully realized, if at all, for African Americans until Juneteenth. What is really interesting about Hampton Roads, however, is the importance of 1861 and the contraband decision. And so at the same location, Point Comfort, you have African landing in 1619, but you have the contraband decision in 1861, which leads to the First and Second Confiscation Acts, the Emancipation Proclamation, and ultimately the 13th Amendment. And so the risk that three men, Baker, Townsend, and Mallory, took to achieve their freedom led to thousands finding their freedom behind Union lines, and that influenced ultimately Juneteenth. So 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, you have General Gordon Granger share the General Order Number 3, which is an executive order. We've talked about executive orders, and I know you've been talking about executive orders. And that executive order enforced the Emancipation Proclamation in Texas, 2 years after many other places in the country. Though, interestingly, did you know, and I bet you did, because I know you, Norfolk was not one of the places where the Emancipation Proclamation freed enslaved people.
Wow. The great city of Norfolk. And, part of this celebration we have what's called Sail 250. And there's been a little controversy there, Norfolk served as a harbor, for a lot of ships that pass by, or frigates. Some see them as battleships, others see them as former cargo or slave ships. So it's a lot of importation took place here as well. So it's not really it's not strange that information they're not making here.
The challenge with the tall ships is that for us it feels strange, right? And when we see ships, a lot of folks come to watch them at the Norfolk Harbor or at Fort Monroe. It's a sight to see. But if we think about maritime life, the rivers were the roads. And so all commerce, all, trafficking happened on the waterway. And so what is, I think, a blind spot is the cultural sensitivity to understand that the tall ships would bring to mind transatlantic slavery. But a reality that we do have to understand is that these ships were part of life at that time. The history of the African arrival and landing or trafficking, forced migration from 1619, really, I've mentioned African landing, but it continues through Africatown in Mobile, Alabama. Even after transatlantic slavery was abolished, it was illegal to traffic Africans direct from Africa. And so that history is something that most of us don't know, we don't talk about. And so with the challenge with this commemoration and with these events, you got to have all the right people at the table, and you got to have a high level of cultural awareness and literacy.
Speaking of all the right people at the table, I know that you are rushing because you've got another table to get to, with all of your responsibility. But just tell us, where were you this weekend, and how impactful was that?
Yes, so this weekend started out with another view of WHRO friend and family show. It also included joining a panel for the Commonwealth of Virginia. So Dr. Sisha Moon, our chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, led a conversation, and I'll be headed to Fort Monroe and to Mill Point Park in Hampton by the end of this week. So Hampton Roads has really sought to tell a whole and complete story. And so I like to call it Freedom Forward, along with my partners at Fort Monroe Foundation and with the Diamond Hanse Foundation. And it's Virginia telling a whole history.
Absolutely. Once again, Eola Dan, Special Advisor for VA250, which is a Virginia's role in celebrating the semi-quincentennial, or the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution and the U.S. independence from Great Britain, coinciding with Juneteenth celebration. Listen, Eola, thank you so much for joining us here on Stay the Water. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the impact that you're making, not just in Hampton Roads, but in the African-American diaspora as well. So thank you so much for the work that you've given your life to.
Thank you. We appreciate you so much as well.
All right. God bless.
All right. Take care.
Well, once again, that was the Special Advisor for VA250. Again, a great, great colleague and friend of mine, and just so excited for the work that she's doing and has done, like I said, her entire career. But it's very interesting, what's taking place now. When we talk about, history coming together and coming ahead, it is a lot. And when we talk about a lot, it is, we can look no further than Juneteenth and also VA250. So what I want to do for the rest of the show, I want to talk a little bit about what is Juneteenth and what is VA250. And we're going to take a look at some other, events that are happening in the area and that have happened this past weekend, and what you could be a part of, and what we see that's going to take place around July 4th holiday. But I want to focus first on Juneteenth. Juneteenth is a celebration. If you're African American, you know it very well. It is a time period where, it really didn't get a lot of publicity until, that was a push that was made in order to make it a holiday. And again, it came with just telling the story of how formerly enslaved people got their freedom and how we celebrate our freedom as well. According to the History Channel, Juneteenth marks June 19th, 1865, and is when enslaved Texans learned they were free. Now, keep in mind, the end of the Civil War, and really when you take a look at the Emancipation Proclamation, which was, the January 1st, 1865, that was signed by Abraham Lincoln, president at the time, that emancipated formerly enslaved people, black people across the country, first starting in D.C. and then making his way down. And, of course, the public hearing held out in the South was held on the Emancipation Oak, located here in Hampton. It's a lot of history on these hallowed grounds here in Hampton Roads. But still, that was the 1st of January. But June 19th, another 6 months plus 18 days. 6 months plus 18 days, the word didn't get to the rest of our brothers and sisters across the country. But really, they knew. The owners knew. However, they didn't tell those who were enslaved. They wanted to keep them working. And of course, the reason why you want to keep somebody working for free, especially when you take a look at the time period, you had some planting season that had to take place for crops. Keep in mind, agriculture was the major driver of wealth in our country. And free labor, and we say free labor, they had to pay one cost, that was a cost to acquire or buy human beings in order to farm. And minimum upkeep, did not have the best of life, didn't have the best of accommodations, didn't have the best of clothing, medical, or anything like that. And because it was cheaper to buy another human being than it was to maintain another human being in the event that human being, and I keep saying human being, not slaves, but in the event that human being expired or became sick or could not work. So with that being the case, they continued working. They kept these people working and did not tell them about their freedom. So when we take a look at Juneteenth, it started June 19, 1865. It marks that time period when enslaved Texans learned that they were free more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And I did say 1865 Emancipation Proclamation, but it was actually 2 years prior to that. The celebration itself began in Texas and spread nationwide, becoming a federal holiday in 2021. Now, Juneteenth honors freedom, resilience, and Black history while recognizing the ongoing fight for equality. Now, that's just a summary from the History Channel. You can go to history.com and see that. But I want to delve a little bit more into what Juneteenth actually is and how it really became what it became. Now, in 1979, Texas itself became the first state to make Juneteenth an official holiday. Now, even though, once again, they were the last to hear it, they were the first ones to actually make an official holiday within the state. Several others followed suit over the years, but decades later, in June of 2021, Congress passed a resolution establishing Juneteenth as a federal holiday, and President Joe Biden signed it into law on June 17, 2021. Again, a momentous occasion because it was something that took over, a couple of centuries to really put into law. That's how long it was actually fought before you had something that was recognized, And even if you look at the official time period of Texas, 1979 to 2021, I mean, that's a lifetime for a lot of people that did not see that day as a federal holiday. But we do see it now. And again, it's because of the work of people on the ground, keeping this message alive, keeping it alive. And it was none other than an educator, a counselor, a civil rights activist from Fort Worth, Texas, Dr. Opal Lee. She was the one giving her flowers now. Every show, she was the one that fought, that was relentless, that was grassroots, knocking on the doors. She was the one that was the driving force around it becoming a federal holiday. Now, again, that's not taken away from anyone else, right? Just like we honor Martin Luther King, but there were many, many other actors, many, many other people that sacrificed in their corners of their community, in their corners of the world. But, Dr. Opal Lee she's known as what's called the mother of Juneteenth, right? For her work that she actually did in order to push this. So, and the honorary title, grandmother of Juneteenth, she's the grandmother of Juneteenth, and the mother of Juneteenth is Clara Peoples for the work that she did out in Oregon for this. But there was something I want to recognize that happened during that time period. It's called a walking campaign. At age 89, she launched what's called Opal's Walk to D.C. She marching 2.5 miles in various cities. The distance symbolically represented the 2.5 years it took for the news of the Emancipation Proclamation to reach enslaved people in Texas. And again, I made that correction at the beginning of the show. I mentioned 6 months after, but it's actually 2.5 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. So for all you historians listening to me, no need to call in. I caught my mistake. So I want to make sure that that's on the record again. But again, just giving recognition, to this very important time period, that we have in our lives. This is America's story as well. We talk about VA250, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about VA250 events that took place over the weekend, and Juneteenth events also, but also in what's going to take place July 4th when we celebrate the actual birthday of the nation, 250th anniversary and birthday of the nation. That Juneteenth means something because it just wasn't, when you talk about America, African Americans are part of that story. But we were part of that story before Juneteenth, meaning that we were part of that story 1776. When you look at 1865 and 1776, or even if you want to go back to the Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, that's a long time. Before, we will be considered a part of the nation itself. And for many, it's a conflict there. So you're talking 89 years from 1865, and then, of course, Emancipation Proclamation talking 87 years, right? But 89 years, almost 90 years before we look at what took place between the nation having its birthday, its independence, and then, or being born, and then African Americans being free. So Juneteenth means a lot. It's more than just a few days off. It's more than just enjoying black culture, but it's recognizing that African Americans were a part of this country from the very beginning. 1619, first enslaved Africans arrived here from Angola on the ship White Lion. And then from there, the importation through the transatlantic slave trade, where America and other nations from all the way from the Americas, South America, Caribbean islands, America, all the way up to Great Britain, all the way up to the European nations, took part and took in Africans and enslaved them. Now, America itself, of course, was the nation, one of the last nations to actually get to end slavery. And of course, the most powerful at that time, most influential, I would say. So many people were following our lead based upon the values in which the country was actually founded on. Again, founded on values of God, Christian values, but practicing non-Christian ways. So when you look at slavery. So again, just recently, the Pope, the Catholic Church, apologized for their role in slavery through the current Pope, who is an African American, family out of New Orleans who were black, himself out of Chicago. So him having black roots itself, that also means something. But we'll go into that a little bit later. But I wanted to point that out, that this story of America runs very, very deep. It's not just a straight black and white story, but it runs very, very deep. Now, when we talk about the end of slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation signed by Abraham Lincoln, January 1st, 1863, once again, I'm correcting myself, not 65, but 63, established that all enslaved people in Confederate states in rebellion against the Union shall then be thenceforth and forever free. But in reality, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't instantly free any enslaved people. Of course, there was still fighting going on and so forth. In Texas, slavery had continued as the state experienced no large-scale fighting or significant presence of troops. As a matter of fact, many enslavers from outside the Lone Star State had moved there as they viewed it as a safe haven for slavery. Now, again, when people talk about the Civil War wasn't about slavery, history shows us through history books, the law, through actions, and through moving what that war was actually about. So don't let anyone tell you anything different. But after the war came to a close in the spring of 65, General Granger, he went to Galveston, Texas in June, which then would more than 250,000, a quarter of a million enslaved people in Texas, right? He gave the word. And in 1866, freedmen in Texas organized the first, what became annual celebration of Emancipation Day on June 19th. Again, freedmen. So, from 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation, to the end of the Civil War, it's 1865, Juneteenth, to the slavery, when slavery was officially abolished with the adoption of the 13th Amendment in December of that year as well, to now the first celebration in 1866, Emancipation Day. Now, some call it Jubilee Day or Freedom Day, but what it has come now to be is Juneteenth. So what happens around Juneteenth time? Well, originally, it was, free. Brother, look, if you were born in slavery and you just came out, Jubilee, you were celebrating, tremendously. Music, prayer services, all that, just taking place because you're free. And that still goes on to this day. When we talk about Juneteenth celebrations, there's a lot of activities that takes place. As a matter of fact, we had a lot of activities this past weekend when we take a look at Juneteenth and what's happening or happened around Hampton Roads. Let's just take a look at a few things that took place. around Hampton Roads itself. As a matter of fact, Juneteenth, when you take a look at one of the major events right over at Fort Monroe, took place just this past Saturday, where you had a celebration, a concert that took place with AMC 250, and where in conjunction with VA250, where you had many stars come out and show up. A phenomenal event. Also, you had, was mentioned earlier, Barbara Hamlee, WHRO. She broadcast. She was there as well broadcasting, and you had many, many vendors out there. We had a great time out there as well. It was actually, it was a tremendous time. Not only that, but over here in Norfolk, it was Juneteenth at Town Point Park. And also, when you take a look at the community block party that took place with Juneteenth and America 250. And then you have various things such as the Juneteenth celebration in Smithfield, in Chesapeake. You also had the fourth annual Juneteenth Unity in the Community Fest in Newport News. That was tremendous as well. And also the second annual Essence of Africa Juneteenth Fashion Show and Gala with Dr. Umar. That was also in Hampton. And on the 20th, you also had the Black Expo that took place. Brian Thompson, who is the founder of the Black Expo and the Virginia Black Film Festival as well, put on a phenomenal event there. I was fortunate enough to be a part of that also. Look for a lot more collaborations there. I'm really excited about the work that he's doing. You also had the 5th annual Juneteenth Jubilee, celebrating fathers and all families on the 21st there also. So it was a full weekend of Juneteenth freedom, Juneteenth celebrations, Juneteenth pageants, Freedom Day, Black Entrepreneur Expo once again in Hampton, the Jazz Teen concert that took place in Virginia Beach. Yeah, that was tremendous as well. So again, lots of celebration, but also lots of education. Of course, the Urban League participated in curated events as well. But again, Juneteenth, it is not just an African-American history, but it is an American holiday celebrating the end of slavery, but more importantly, celebrating the incorporation of all Americans into this idea of America. All men being created equal, having the ability to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. Once again, as we live every single day, we pray that Juneteenth is just not a day, but we pray that Juneteenth is a calling to be more than just who you are, but a calling to be a citizen, a calling to be kind, a calling to give your talents to this great country that is ours. This don't belong to just one group of people. It's ours. A calling to be all that God has called you to be. And as always, I want to thank you for joining us here on Stay in the Water. I want to wish all the fathers a happy Father's Day on this day. And until next time, be good, be great, God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Carrie Washington, and you're listening to State of the Water with award-winning host Dr. Eric Claville.